إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له، وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. Inshallah ta'ala, we'll go through chapter 3 and chapter 4 from the book of Ma'arij al-Qabul. These two chapters from a book that we are already studying, but for anyone that was never with us before going through that book, these two chapters are sufficient, inshallah ta'ala, for the subject that they address. And this is in the subject of al-Aqidah, mainly the Aqidah of the Tawheed of the Ibadah, the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in worship. And the way this will be, inshallah ta'ala, is meant to be that will require for those who are present, inshallah ta'ala, today till Sunday morning, inshallah ta'ala, that we have to put some effort. And the effort, alhamdulillah, it's not physical effort. It's just to be alert and to be patient. It might not be the most exciting way, if it's correct to say, to study something, because we're going to go through the book word by word. So there's going to be back and forth, Arabic and English. For us to really be attached to the text and to what's mentioned there, we can learn, for those who want to learn some vocabulary in the Arabic and things of that nature, mashallah, this is good. And if you don't understand anything in the Arabic language, it's still sufficient, inshallah, with the translation, but requires patience. And the way that this style of teaching, which is the way of the ulama, always going through the books and the mutun and so on, one of the great benefits of it is that the effort that a person put into the subject, that the instructor is not necessarily making it easy from the very beginning, classifying things and putting things in the right perspective and examples and so on. So that effort that we put in, at the end, mashallah ta'ala, it's very benefiting. So also at the end, inshallah, at the end of every chapter, we can summarize it, we can speak about it, inshallah ta'ala, in a way that would bring things together. So this is very important to notice, inshallah, to recognize. And the fact that we are here in the house of Allah, or those who are listening, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless our gatherings. So this is by itself is an objective. Even if we don't learn anything, just being in the masjid with the intention, seeking the knowledge of the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, this is ibadah. This is an act of ibadah, act of worship. And this ilm, and this is why we're attached to the text, is that this is the ilm al-mawruth. This is the inherited knowledge. This knowledge is to be inherited. Inherited from one generation to the other, goes all the way to the Prophet ﷺ, the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. And as the Prophet ﷺ, he said in the authentic hadith, that al-ulama warathatul anbiya, that the people of knowledge are the inheritors of the prophets. And the anbiya lam yuwarithu dirhaman wala dinar, wa innama warathu ilman. The prophets did not pass after them from the inheritance dirham or dinar or wealth or money, but rather it's the knowledge. So it's nothing but the wahy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we have to follow and to learn and to have the patience. And that's why with ikhlas, with sincerity, that this is only for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, seeking the most valuable thing, which is the ilm, the knowledge of the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. And one important aspect of this, that Imam Bukhari rahimahullah, he has a chapter in Kitabul Ilm titled Babu Rafi' al-Ilm wa Zuhur al-Jahl. The chapter is Rafu' al-Ilm, the ilm to be lifted and the jahl to be widespread. A time would come when the ilm will be lifted away from the people. And the jahl, which is the opposite of al-ilm, ignorance, will be apparent, will be widespread. And he mentions in the chapter the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يَقْبِضُ الْعِلْمَ انْتِزَاعًا يَنْتَزِعُهُ من صدور الناس. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not take the knowledge from the hearts of the people. ولكن بقبض العلماء. But rather by the death of the ulama. حتى إذا لم يبقى عالم. Till when there is no عالم. حتى إذا لم يبقى عالم اتخذ الناس رؤوسا جهالا فأفتوا بغير علم فضلوا وأضلوا. So the people would take ignorant heads and they would ask them and they would give them the fatwa, the answer, and they would deviate others and they would deviate themselves. Because without knowledge, then it's ignorance. But when he put this title, and he mentioned the statement, part of the title of in Sahih Imam Bukhari, he says, باب رفع العلم وظهور الجهل وقال ربيعة. Rabi'a is the one that is known by Rabi'atul Ra'i, one of the shuyukh, the shuyukh of Imam Malik rahimahullah. He said, لا ينبغي لأحد عنده شيء من العلم أن يضيع نفسه. This is part of the title of the chapter by Imam Bukhari rahimahullah, the statement of Rabi'atul Ra'i. It does not befit for anyone that has something of the knowledge that he waste himself. If a person has some knowledge, has the means to seek knowledge, he should not waste himself and waste his life, basically. And as Ibn Hajar rahimahullah, in the explanation of this in the book of Fath al-Bari, he mentioned that as long as people are seeking knowledge, he says, and I'm quoting, وَمَا دَامَ مَنْ يَتَعَلَّمُ الْعِلْمِ مَوْجُودًا لَا يَحْصُلُ الرَّفْعِ. As long as there's someone, people are seeking knowledge, then the raf' or lifting the knowledge is not going to happen. So when does lifting the knowledge will happen is when people, they become in state of zuhd. They don't really care about the knowledge of the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The ilm is aziz, is honored. So as long as people are seeking knowledge, that means the ilm will be present on the face of earth. So this is another important intention, that a person would take it upon himself that he learn the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as a way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would use that individual, make us means to establish the knowledge or for the knowledge to be present. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will save his religion. The religion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is superior, no doubt about this, but it happens through the means. So whoever is honored by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to preserve this deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this is a great honor, and that's why we should, inshallah ta'ala, seek help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be upon this. And another thing is, again, just some introductions to make sure that we're all on the same page, if it's correct to say, inshallah. The ilm is not necessarily what we will hear and listen and know, but rather is the benefiting knowledge that we benefit, and that is to make it into actions. The ilm that would affect our hearts. Because as Al-Hasan Al-Basri rahimahullah, he says, and I'm quoting that, he says, Al-ilmu ilman. The knowledge is two types of knowledge. Ilmu al-lisan, فَذَاكَ حُجَّةٌ عَلَى ابْنِ آدَمٍ. The ilm, the knowledge of the tongue. Just explaining things, saying things. It's ilm. But this is hujjah, this is establishing the evidence upon the sons of Adam. وَعِلْمٌ فِي الْقَلْبِ. A knowledge in the heart, فَذَاكَ الْعِلْمُ النَّافِعُ. This is the benefiting knowledge. And the knowledge in the heart can never be attained unless the ilm is being conveyed with al-lisan. So the lisan has to speak, so we have to learn the knowledge, but it's not just to keep it in our ears or does not go through or beyond our throats. The intention of this, the objective of this is to get it into our hearts so that it becomes ilmun nafi'. So it becomes a benefiting knowledge. Otherwise, a person, the ilm becomes evidence against him. And the same thing with the Quran, with the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. And he says, وَهُوَ أَوَّلُ مَا يُرْفَعُ. The first type of knowledge that will be lifted, the first one is al-ilm al-nafi'. The ilm is that is in the heart. That's the first one that will be lifted from the people. Why? Because they're not applying it. So we can see or have an understanding to this, even though the ilm is present, but you see how much information is out there. So much information out there. Haqq wa batil and everything. But how much of that is in the hearts of men? How much is that in the hearts of the people? Because if it's lifted from the hearts, then this is the sign that what comes next is the lift of the ilm, even though this is going to be at the end of times. But the point here is again, is to make sure that we are preserving the ilm in ourselves, to save ourselves from the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to be among the people of Jannah, is to learn the ilm and to make sure that it's present in our hearts, and that's the benefiting knowledge. And as Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah, he said, ليس العلم ما حفظ إنما العلم ما نفع. Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah, he says, the ilm, the knowledge is not what is memorized, but rather the knowledge is what is benefiting. He does not belittle the hifz. One of the very important matter of studying for the student of knowledge is to memorize. This is part of ilm, no doubt about this. But what matters is the benefit, and that's one of the benefits of al-hifz. When someone memorizes something, that means he's keeping it in his heart. He keeps on memorizing it, repeating it, so that it stays in the heart, so that he carries the ilm with him everywhere he goes. It's already contained in his own self. But the benefit of it is when it's applied. When a person then, as a result of the ilm, he fears Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he have the hope for the rewards from Allah, have the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that is the benefit of the ilm, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, إِنَّمَا يَخْشَى اللَّهَ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ الْعُلَمَاء. Indeed, those who fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are the ulama, those who have knowledge. So, إِنَّمَا الْعِلْمُ الْخَشْيَةِ, this quote that is always repeated by Abdullah ibn Mubarak rahimahullah. Indeed, إِنَّمَا الْعِلْمُ الْخَشْيَةِ. When he defined al-ilm, when he defined the knowledge, he mentioned one word, which is al-khashya, the fear of Allah. That's the benefiting knowledge. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us among those who learn and have their hearts affected, and to be steadfast upon the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we start inshallah ta'ala. This is, if you have the PDF, and make sure inshallah ta'ala that if you want to benefit, make sure that you write things, because as you would see, things need to be at the end put together. So unless you take notes, الكلام ينسي بعضه بعضا. The kalam makes a person forgets. The kalam makes a person forget what is being said with other kalam. It's not going to be one sentence, it's going to be 80 something pages inshallah. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless our time. If you have the PDF, or I'm going to again go back and forth between here and the translation. The title of this third chapter, and the first two chapters was about the tawheed of al-rububiyyah, the oneness of the rububiyyah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then talking about La ilaha illallah. And the last thing that we talked about was the conditions for La ilaha illallah and the like of this. This book, by the way, is Ma'arij al-Qabul by al-Hafiz al-Hakami, the one that has the same book as the 200 questions and answers in Aqidah, that is very famous. He's the same author of this book. It's one of the most comprehensive books in Aqidah. It's encyclopedia of Aqidah, even though the word encyclopedia is not the right word, but one of the most comprehensive books with many, many evidences in every mas'ala, in every matter of Aqidah. So that's why it's taken a long time, but it's important to immerse ourselves in learning this, inshallah ta'ala. So the title of this chapter, the first chapter, is about al-ibadah. He says, في تعريف العبادة, the definition of al-ibadah, وذكر بعض أنواعها, and some of the types of ibadah, وأن من صرف منها شيئا لغير الله فقد أشرك. And whoever takes the ibadah to other than Allah, do an act of worship to other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, قد أشرك, that means he committed an act of shirk. So this is the first chapter, and it will have some of the ibadat, as he mentioned some of these types of ibadat, and most of what he would mention, ibadat done by the heart, the fear of Allah, the khudu', submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with humbleness and humility and the love of Allah. So all of that will be mentioned, tawakkul ala Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So a big portion of this chapter talks about these, the a'mal and the deeds done by the heart, with the evidences of the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam. And then after that, the next chapter will talk about some of the aspects of a shirk in general terms, but then the next chapters will be in some details of that, inshallah, that we will do after this seminar, inshallah, when we continue with the classes. So he says here, as a tamheed or introduction to this subject, he said, قد عرفت مما قدمنا في معنى لا إله إلا الله أن الإله هو المألوه الذي تألهه القلوب. Previously had been mentioned the meaning of La ilaha illallah, and that it means أن الإله, La ilaha. So the ilah is the one that is ma'luh. This is linguistically, the word ilah comes from al-ma'luh, from aliha ya'lah, ilahatan, has a root to it, which means the one that alladhi ta'lahuhu al-qulub. What is the meaning of al-ilah? The one that ta'lahuhu al-qulub. The hearts ta'lahu. What is ta'lahuhu al-qulub? Ay ta'buduhu, which means that it worship him. The word Allah, lafdul jalala, the best of all of the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that every name and attribute of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is included in when you say Allah, that has a root to it, comes from aliha ya'lah ilahatan, the one to be worshipped. So by knowing the name Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in itself, you already know that what it means is the one to be worshipped with. This is now he says ta'buduhu mahabbatan wa tadhallulan wa khawfan wa raja'an wa raghaban wa rahaban wa tawakkulan alayhi, and so on. With that you worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with the perfect love of Allah. Tadhallulan, at-tadhallul is the humility, to humble oneself to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that you are abd. You are created by Allah, you have no power, you have no might whatsoever. You are turning to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. Wa khawfan, with the fear of Allah. Raja'an, with hope. Your hope and fears, your hopes and fears only to Allah, from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us, as we would see inshallah ta'ala. Because these things are given, we already created in these matters. So either a person fear Allah, or he would fear other than Allah. Either he would have hopes in other than Allah, which is really the misery of this life, or to have hopes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But that's ilm, that's knowledge, has nusus, has text in the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam for us to learn. وَرَهَبًا وَرَغَبًا وَرَهَبًا يَدْعُونَنَا رَغَبًا وَرَهَبًا. Al-raghab is that you want to seek, you're having zeal to earn and to get from what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has, and to have the fear of Allah. وَتَوَكُّلًا عَلَيْهِ, relying upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. اطراحًا بين يديه, to leave yourself, to turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with seeing that you have no means and no power except by the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. واستعانة به والتجاء إليه, seeking help from him, seeking refuge in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. افتقارا إليه, that you have the need, you are in need of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يا أيها الناس أنتم الفقراء إلى الله والله الغني الحميد. O people, O mankind, you are the fuqara to Allah. You are in need of Allah, and He is the most rich subhanahu wa ta'ala. So all of these things is included in the meaning of ilah. This is what ilah means, the one to be worshipped. And some would make it more summarized meaning of this: al-ilah alladhi ta'lahu al-qulub, يعني محبة وتعظيما وخضوعا, with the exaltation, the love and humbleness, submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is in the linguistic meaning of the word ilah. So therefore, la ilaha illallah means what? No ilah, no one to be worshipped, no one to have this exaltation in your heart to, or the perfect love, the fear, the absolute fear, and the hope and so on, with the ibadah, in the sense of the ibadah, except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He's the only one worthy of worship. So the meaning of al-ibadah, as we would see, many people, they don't have the proper understanding of it. It's not just the rituals that a person do. This is what al-ibadah, and some of the act of worship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. And that's why he says, وَذَلِكَ لَا يَنْبَغِي إِلَّا لِلَّهِ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ. That does not befit to be for anyone other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. خَالِقِ كُلِّ شَيْءٍ وَمُصَوِّرِهِ وَمُصَرِّفِهِ وَمُدَبِّرِهِ. That He is the creator of all things. He's the one that, Al-Musawwir, one of the names of Allah, the one that gives everything its image, how He created everyone different. We have different images, whether it's in the human beings or the other creation of Allah. وَمُصَرِّفُ, the one that runs the affairs and maintains the affairs of everyone. وَمُدَبِّرُ التَّدْبِيرِ, that every breath we take is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, when questioning the disbelievers and the hearts of the believers, هَلْ مِنْ خَالِقٍ غَيْرُ اللَّهِ يَرْزُقُكُم مِّنَ السَّمَاءِ وَالْأَرْضِ. Is there any khaliq, a creator, other than Allah, that will provide for you from the heavens and the earth? How the khalq and the rizq, the khalq, the creation of Allah, and the provisions, that we're all concerned about rizq and provisions and money and eating and drinking and all of that. How the ayah says that هَلْ مِنْ خَالِقٍ غَيْرُ اللَّهِ. If He's the khaliq subhanahu wa ta'ala, that means He's the razzaq. They go by necessity together. So when someone separates between both, believe in the Khaliq subhanahu wa ta'ala, but then when it comes to the matters of rizq, he does not put it together. No, Al-Khaliq is Al-Raziq. He is the provider subhanahu wa ta'ala, and no one is a provider except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He is the provider subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, Mubdi al-Khalqi wa Mu'idih, the one that initiate the creation, the one that would resurrect them, wa Muhihi wa Mubidu. Since this starts with Khaliqi, so it's all Maksur, wa Muhihi wa Mubidihi, the one that gives them life and take their life away. Al-Fa'alu lima yurid, as it's stated in the Quran. Whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will for something, it happens. الذي هو على كل شيء شهيد الذي لا ملجأ ولا منجى منه إلا إليه ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that is witness over all things. No malja, no refuge, no saving to be saved, manja, salvation. Any of that is only from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and none but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله. And there's no might and there's no power except by Allah. And the more we read the Quran, the more we get to know that, and this is one of the treasures of Jannah, la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. When you speak about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you don't see yourself. We see ourselves that we are in need of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in every aspect. Then the ayat, وَإِن يَمْسَسْكَ اللَّهُ بِضُرٍّ فَلَا كَاشِفَ لَهُ إِلَّا هُوَ وَإِن يُرِدْكَ بِخَيْرٍ فَلَا رَادَّ لِفَضْلِهِ. You won't find in the Quran anything attributed to the human beings when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is mentioned. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala touch you with harm, no one can lift that away from you. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will good for you, no one can push away the bounty of Allah. No one can push away the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. ما يفتح الله للناس من رحمة فلا ممسك له. No, ما يفتح الله. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, here is the fa'il. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not open to the people anything from His mercy. No one can withhold it. If He subhanahu wa ta'ala will for some mercy for them to be upon them, no one can withhold this. وَمَا يُمْسِكْ, and if He withhold anything from them, فَلَا مُرْسِلَ لَهُ مِنْ بَعْدِهِ, no one can let it to be for the creation of Allah after Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. يَا أَيُّهَا النَّاسُ أَنْتُمُ الْفُقَرَاءُ إِلَى اللَّهِ وَاللَّهُ الْغَنِيُّ الْحَمِيدُ إِنْ يَشَأْ يُذْهِبْكُمْ وَيَأْتِ بِخَلْقٍ جَدِيدٍ وَمَا ذَلِكَ عَلَى اللَّهِ بِعَزِيزٍ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most rich, and we all are in need of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with every breath we take. So he says, وَالْعَبْدُ إِنْ أُرِيدَ بِهِ. Now, Al-Abd, this is valuable knowledge. Why? Because we say the ibadah is the purpose of our life and we are ibad of Allah. What is really the meaning of Al-Abd? The essence of what is the meaning of Al-Abd? So he says, وَالْعَبْدُ إِنْ أُرِيدَ بِهِ الْمُعَبَّدُ. So there's two ways here. Either Al-Abd means Al-Mu'abbad, or the Abd means Al-Abid. Al-Mu'abbad or Al-Abid. Al-Mu'abbad أي المذلل المسخر, the one that is humbled, the one that is under the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is Al-Mu'abbad. They would say طريق معبد, path that is mu'abbad. That means the path, the road has been flattened, has been made in such a way that cars can drive over it, people can walk on it, they don't fall. So it's been made in such a way for the use of the people. So Al-Mu'abbad is the one that is under the power of Allah, humbleness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that is all of the makhluqat. دخل فيه جميع المخلوقات. All of the creation of Allah, they come under this meaning of Al-Mu'abbad. من جميع العالم العلوي والسفلي, every creation of Allah, whether it's above us or underneath us, من عاقل وغيره, whether a person is human beings, al-aqil, intellect, or any creation of Allah. ومن رطب ويابس ومتحرك وساكن. This is the different creation of Allah. وظاهر وكامن ومؤمن وكافر وبر وفاجر وغير ذلك. Anything fresh, dry, moving, in state of sukoon, not moving, apparent physically, non-physical, believer, disbeliever, righteous, wicked, it doesn't matter. All of the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they are under the meaning of Al-Mu'abbad. That means they're all under the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They cannot do anything except by the permission of Allah. Al-Kullu مخلوق لله عز وجل مسخر بتسخيره مدبر بتدبيره. They're all makhluk, all creation of Allah, musakhar. They're therefore whatever they're created for. And they are under the tadbir of Allah. Their life is maintained by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَلِكُلٍّ مِّنْهَا رَسْمٌ يَقِفُ عَلَيْهِ وَحَدٌّ يَنْتَهِي إِلَيْهِ. Every creation of Allah has rasm. Al-rasm is, this is their ways of things. Human beings, they cannot live under the water and breathe the water or fly in the air. The way that Allah created the human beings, they continue to be human beings. And every animal, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guided it to whatever it's created for. He subhanahu wa ta'ala, the one that created everything. So he says, لَا الشَّمْسُ يَنْبَغِي لَهَا أَن تُدْرِكَ الْقَمَرَ وَلَا اللَّيْلُ سَابِقُ النَّهَارِ. The sun does not befit for it to reach the moon, and the night does not come before the day. كُلٌّ يَجْرِي لِأَجَلٍ مُسَمَّى. Everything is according to precise measure till the end when everything returns to Allah. لا يتجاوزه مثقال ذرة ذلك تقدير عليم وتدبير العدل الحكيم. Everything is by the very amazing creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is al-mu'abbad. So all the creation of Allah, they under this meaning, they're all under the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وإن أريد به العابد. So al-mu'abbad and al-abid. Al-abid is the worshipper, is the one that is doing the acts of Ubodiyah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. خص ذلك بالمؤمنين. This is special for the believers. وإن كان أكثر المشركين يعبدون الله عز وجل ويتقربون إليه بكثير من العبادات لكن لما عبدوا مع الله غيره وأشركوه معه في إلهيته كانت أعمالهم هباء منثورا. Even though many of the mushrikeen, they associate partners with Allah, they worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and they try to get themselves closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with many of acts of worship, but when they worshipped with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala other than Him, their actions become haba'an manthura, something that, like the cotton when it flies in the air, the wind blows it away. There's no benefit of their actions because with the shirk, because of this one evil action that ruins all of the different good deeds, and that is to associate partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So al-abid here refers to the believers, those who worship none but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. Then he mentioned the ayat كَرَمَادٍ اشْتَدَّتْ بِهِ الرِّيحُ فِي يَوْمٍ عَاصِفٍ لَا يَقْدِرُونَ مِمَّا كَسَبُوا عَلَى شَيْءٍ. This is for those who associate partners with Allah, their deeds are blown away. وكمثل صفوان عليه تراب فأصابه وابل فتركه صلدا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned many examples in the Quran when it comes to the actions of the disbelievers. Like a rock that has dust on it, and once the rain comes, washes away the dust and the rock has nothing on it. This is how the actions of those who their actions are not based and built on the proper belief of the tawheed of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So many ayat وَكَسَرَابٍ بِقِيعَةٍ يَحْسَبُهُ الظَّمْآنُ مَاءً حَتَّى إِذَا جَاءَهُ لَمْ يَجِدْهُ شَيْئًا وَوَجَدَ اللَّهَ عِنْدَهُ فَوَفَّاهُ حِسَابًا. The example that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also gave to the disbelievers, like the one in the desert and he sees a mirage from a distance. He thinks that there is water there, but once he gets there, he doesn't find anything. The lost hopes, the hopes that has no basis to it. And it's easy for anybody to have whatever hopes they want. And we're not judged and we're not receiving benefits or goods based on hopes. You can hope whatever you want to hope for. But as long as it's based on the truth and the wahy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's useless. So the disbelievers, they hoped whatever they hope they have to those who they worship besides Allah and things of that nature. أو كظلمات في بحر لجي يغشاه موج من فوقه موج من فوقه سحاب ظلمات بعضها فوق بعض إذا أخرج يده لم يكد يراها ومن لم يجعل الله له نورا فما له من نور. And this is as in Surah An-Nur. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned the darknesses of disbelief, the darknesses of shirk, the darknesses of sins, that in such a way that becomes one layer after the other, as the darkness in the bottom of the oceans. If someone sticks his hand to see, he would not see anything. And this is وَمَنْ لَمْ يَجْعَلِ اللَّهُ لَهُ نُورًا فَمَا لَهُ مِنْ نُورٍ. Those who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not give them light, there's no light for them. The light of guidance, the light of being obedient to Allah and to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. Why is that? ذَلِكَ بِأَنَّهُمْ اتَّخَذُوا الشَّيَاطِينَ أَوْلِيَاءَ مِنْ دُونِ اللَّهِ. They took the shayateen as awliya, loyals besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They worship other than Allah. That's why anyone that worshipped other than Allah, even if they claim that they worship a prophet or worship a righteous person, in reality they are worshipping shayateen, the devils, because this is what the devils, they work on the human beings to take them away from the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone to worship other than Allah. Also واتبعوا ما أسخط الله وكرهوا رضوانه فأحبط أعمالهم. They followed what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hates and the wrath of Allah, and they hate the pleasure of Allah. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ruined their deeds. وتولوا الطاغوت, and they loyal themselves to the طاغوت, anything that is being worshipped besides Allah. Took them فأخرجوهم من النور إلى الظلمات وعبدوا الشيطان وقد عهد الله إليهم ألا يعبدوه وبين لهم عداوته. So these Tawagheed took them away from the light to the darknesses, and they worshipped the shaitan. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took the covenant from each and every one not to worship the shaitan, and He informed them of the enmity of the shaitan. إن الشيطان لكم عدو فاتخذوه عدوا إنما يدعو حزبه ليكونوا من أصحاب السعير. He is an enemy to you, so take him as an enemy. It is not sufficient that you know that he's your enemy. You have to take him as your enemy. And when you take someone as your enemy, you protect yourself, you guard yourself, you have weapons, means. So you have to protect yourself from the ways of shaitan. أفتتخذونه وذريته أولياء من دوني وهم لكم عدو بئس للظالمين بدلا. How can someone take the shaitan and his offsprings as awliya, supporters and helpers, min duni, other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So it's either wilayatullah or wilayatul shaitan. Either to be those who receive the support and the help from Allah versus those who are supported by the shaitan. And those who are awliyaullah, they fulfill the objectives of their lives, and that means Allah guide them to be steadfast upon the deen of Allah till they depart from this life. Even if the time that they live in, they're oppressed or weak, it doesn't matter, as long as they are steadfast upon the truth. فخالفوا أمر الله وتولوا أعداءه وكذبوا رسله وأنبياءه وحاربوا حزبه وأولياءه وأرادوا تشييد الكفر وإعلاءه ورد الحق وإباءه فأبى الله عز وجل إلا أن يتم نوره ويظهر دينه ويعلي كلمته وينصر أولياءه ويحق الحق بكلماته ويقطع دابر الكافرين ويجعل حزبه هم الغالبين ويجعل العاقبة للمتقين ولا عدوان إلا على الظالمين. So those who took these partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they disobeyed the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they became loyal to the enemies of Allah, they denied the message of the messengers, and so on, establishing the matters of disbelief and rejecting the truth. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would always make the truth and His light and His religion to be superior and to be victorious. And those who are loyal to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be the ones that are victorious by the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. لكن المؤمنون هم عباد حق. So the believers are the true ibad of Allah. So all of that is affirming the mean here, the meaning that many of those who associate partners with Allah, they worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but they worship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala other than Allah. So the believers are the true ibad of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, الذين أفردوه بإلهيته وربوبيته. Those who they make the uluhiyya, the worship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone, وأسمائه وصفاته, and the names and attributes of Allah, ولم يشبهوه بشيء من خلقه. They never make any likening of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to His creation. ولم يسووا شيئا من خلقه به. No equal to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. أولئك الذين تضاعف لهم الحسنة بعشر أمثالها إلى 700 ضعف إلى أضعاف كثيرة. Those are the ones that their deeds are rewarded. They are rewarded 10 times to 700 times to many folds as a result of their iman and their belief and worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. من جاء بالحسنة فله عشر أمثالها. Whoever come with a hasana, this will multiply for him 10 times. And the ayah, مثل الذين ينفقون أموالهم في سبيل الله. The example of those who spend for the sake of Allah, كمثل حبة أنبتت 7 سنابل في كل سنبلة 100 حبة والله يضاعف لمن يشاء والله واسع عليم. من ذا الذي يقرض الله قرضا حسنا فيضاعفه له أضعافا كثيرة. More than 700 times in a way that no one knows except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. تولوا الله, when they are loyal to Allah, meaning worshipping none but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So as a result of that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took them from the darknesses to the light. أخرجهم من ظلمات الكفر. So the ظلمات, what are the different types of darknesses in this life? ظلمات الكفر, the darknesses of the kufr. Allah take them from the darknesses of al-kufr إلى نور الإيمان, to the light of al-iman, faith. ومن ظلمات الضلال, the second type of darkness, the darkness of deviation with all its levels, إلى نور الهدى, to the light of guidance. ومن ظلمات الجهل, and from the darknesses of ignorance إلى نور العلم, to the light of knowledge. And number 4, ومن ظلمات الغي إلى نور الرشاد, from the darknesses of al-ghay, sinful life, transgression, to the light of guidance to be away from disobeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَمَن يَتَوَلَّ اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا فَإِنَّ حِزْبَ اللَّهِ هُمُ الْغَالِبُونَ. Those who are loyal to Allah and His Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam and the believers, they are the ghalibun. They are the ones that are non-defeated. Because if the faith is in the heart, no one can defeat what's in the heart when it comes to the belief in Allah and the love of Allah. مَلَأَ اللَّهُ قُلُوبَهُم, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala filled their hearts بِنُورِ مَعْرِفَتِهِ وَمَحَبَّتِهِ وَالشَّوْقِ إِلَى لِقَائِهِ. He subhanahu wa ta'ala, the one that fills the heart. When the hearts are truthful, having the truthfulness and a sidq in turning to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone, never to be attached to other than Allah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala fill the hearts of the people like this with the light of knowing Allah and the love of Allah, hope for to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فَلَمْ تَتَّسِعْ لِغَيْرِهِ, their hearts would not have space to other than Allah. دَنَ الشَّيْطَانُ مِنْ قُلُوبِهِمْ فَاحْتَرَقَ بِنُورِ إِيمَانِهِمْ. If the shaitan tried to come closer to their hearts, he is burned by the light of their iman. The heart is the objective of the shaitan. Shaitan wants to enter the heart, right? Shaitan does not just want to say things and leave. No, he's waiting for you to give him a chance. So that once he goes to the heart, what happens? What is the position or what's the thing in the heart? Not necessarily that a person becomes a disbeliever, but you have al-basar with your eyes and you have al-basira with your heart. The heart sees beyond what the physical things that people see. And the heart sees by the wahy, not from people making or having hallucinations, by the wahy from Allah. So once the shaitan is in the heart, then the person is distorted. He's not able to see things anymore. He sees the haqq as batil, the truth as falsehood, the falsehood as the truth. The matter becomes mixed up for him because now the shaitan is rooted into his heart. So the believers, when they are constantly in their ibadah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone and protecting themselves, and that's why the adhkar and the salawat and so on, if the shaitan try to come in and to enter, he's burned by the light of their iman. فَنَكَصَ عَلَى عَقِبِهِ خَاسِئًا حَسِيرًا. He turns away in loss. وَأَيْسَ مِنْهُمْ أَنْ يُطِيعُوهُ فَانْقَلَبَ مَذْمُومًا مَدْحُورًا فَعِنْدَ ذَلِكَ عَزَّ نَفْسَهُ اللَّعِينَ. When the shaitan is in that state of loss, he would make condolence to himself by saying إِلَّا عِبَادَكَ مِنْهُ الْمُخْلَصِينَ. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Iblis, he asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give him the time till the day of judgment. وقال فبعزتك لأغوينهم أجمعين. By your might and power, O Allah, I will deviate all of them. إلا عبادك منهم المخلصين. The only ones that are safe from the plots of shaitan and the deviation of shaitan, your عبادك. See how the wordings? إلا عبادك منهم المخلصين. Your ibad, among them there are mukhlasin. So they fulfill the meaning of the ubodiyah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone, and they are mukhlasin. They are purely to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, no space to other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Hearts are not attached to a dead person or to this or that, completely turned to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone, and they fulfill the meaning of to be a abd to Allah with all what that means. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Inna ibadi laysa laka alayhim sultan. My ibad, this is the second meaning of al-abid. My ibad, you have no authority over them, the shaitan. That means you have authority over those who are other than ibadullah. His authority is only whispers. He does not force anyone to do anything. But they gave the strength to the shaitan by obeying him, then he becomes the one that dictates on them what to do, left and right and so on. So the believers, حَفِظُوا اللَّهَ فَحَفِظَهُمْ. You know the hadith of Ibn Abbas, احفظ الله يحفظك. احفظ الله, you protect and guard the commands of Allah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will guard you. What is the most important means of being guarded is to be protected from the shaitan. And the physical, of course, means of being safe. فَحَفِظَهُمْ وَصَدَقُوا مَا عَاهَدُوا اللَّهَ عَلَيْهِ فَلَمْ يَنْكُثُوا أَيْمَانَهُمْ. They were truthful in their covenant with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They did not break their covenant and their iman, their oath. تعرفوا على الله. This is the meaning of the hadith of the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام. تعرفوا إلى الله في الرخاء. They get to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at times of ease. This is times of ease. We have the means to sit and to learn and to get to know Allah. As we said, what is our job in this life? You can, and there are many different ways to say this, the Ubodiyah to Allah, but one of which is التعرف على Allah. Our goal in life is to get to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And those who waste their life, when they waste it without getting to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if a person knows Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with his names and attributes, with being abd to Allah, the more the person fulfilled ubudiyah, this meaning of being abd, the more he get to know Allah. Because knowing Allah is not just to know some information, it's when this heart is purely turning to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone and worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with the heart, with the speech, with the actions. This is now the person would get to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's a different level of life that, as one of the early generations of Islam, he said, لو يعلم الملوك وأبناء الملوك ما نحن فيه لجالدون عليها بالسيوف. If the kings and the sons of the kings, they know what we are in now, meaning what's in their hearts, they would fight over this with the swords, but they can't because it's in their hearts. That means this is the joy of this life, this is the beauty of this life. To get to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala في الرخاء. When you know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the times of ease, بالعبادة, with worship, فعرفهم في الشدة بالفرج. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the word is the same word used, فعرفهم, even though Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows everyone, that means Allah would support them and help them في الشدة, the times of difficulty, with the ease. And everyone will face the moment of death. That's the most time that a person would face difficulty. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, يثبت الله الذين آمنوا بالقول الثابت في الحياة الدنيا وفي الآخرة. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives steadfastness to the believers in this life and in the hereafter. So why? Because they تعرفوا على الله في الرخاء. When it's times of ease and goodness, they were seeking the knowledge of getting to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. صدقوا رسله وآمنوا بكتابه. They believed in the messengers, they believed in the books of Allah. وانقادوا لأمره, submitted themselves to the commands of Allah. وانكفوا عما نهى عنه, they turned away from what Allah forbade. ثم تجردوا لنصرة دينه, then they became focused on giving aid and victory to the deen of Allah. وجاهدوا بأموالهم وأنفسهم, struggled with their wealth and their own selves في سبيله. ودخل الناس بذلك في دين الله أفواجا طوعا وكرها. People entered into the fold of Islam. وقادوهم إلى الجنة بالسلاسل, and they took them to the Jannah with the chains. This is as the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام and the companions رضي الله عنهم نصروا الله فنصرهم. They made victory and aid to the deen of Allah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala aided them. وشكروه فشكرهم. They were grateful to Allah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was grateful to them. وذكروه فذكرهم. They make remembrance of Allah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned them. عرفوا ما خلقوا له فأقبلوا عليه. This is the believers. Some of the characteristics of the believers. They got to know what they have been created for, so they went forward for it. They were not hesitant. ورأوا ما سواه مما لا يعنيهم فلم يلتفتوا إليه. And they looked at other than that is of no concern to them, they didn't turn to it. This is part of the ways of shaitan in this life, is that he divert people to the nonsense and what's no benefit for it, instead of being busy with what they've been created for. وآثروا ما يبقى على ما يفنى. They made ithar, they chose what stays versus what goes away, which is the hereafter stays and this dunya goes away. وتعلقت أرواحهم بالرفيق الأعلى. Their souls are attached to the best companionship, the most exalted, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. أولئك هم خاصة الله من خلقه والمصطفون من عباده. They are the best of this creation of Allah. أولئك هم أولياء المتقون. These are the awliya of Allah, the people of taqwa. وحزبه الغالبون الذين لا خوف عليهم ولا هم يحزنون. No fear for them, nor shall they grieve. ليوفيهم أجورهم ويزيدهم من فضله إنه غفور شكور. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in the Quran, for Allah to give them the rewards and to increase for them from His bounties. Now, this book, Ma'arij al-Qabul, is basically lines of poetry that is being explained. The lines of poetry, it's called Sullam al-Wusul, the ladder of reaching. So the line here that is going, this is all just introduction, that he will explain. He says, ثم العبادة هي اسم جامع لكل ما يرضى الإله السامع. This is now the line here. Then the ibadah. And this is after what has been mentioned in the previous chapters. So al-ibadah, what is al-ibadah? التي خلق الله لها الخلق. This ibadah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the people for. وأخذ بها عليهم الميثاق, and He took the covenant from them. وأرسل بها رسله. Why the messengers have been sent? To call the people to worship Allah. The messengers were not sent to tell the people Allah exists or anything else, to worship Allah. أن يعبدوا الله, worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. وأنزل كتبه, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brought His books because of this ibadah. ولأجلها خلقت الدنيا والآخرة والجنة والنار. And because of that, the dunya, the hereafter, the Jannah and the Nar has been created. And all of the creation of Allah, they're all in state of ibadah. All of them, except this unique creation of Allah, which is the human beings and the jinn. Allah gave them a choice, whether to worship or not, sending messages, revealing books. For those who choose to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then they're part of this harmonial universal, the universe, right? Versus those, the only ones that they call it and nashaz, those who are the abnormalities of the universe, are those who do not worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The birds are in state of submission of Allah, the trees, the skies, all of the creation of Allah and the believers. ألم ترى أن الله يسجد له من في السماوات ومن في الأرض والشمس والقمر والنجوم والجبال والشجر والدواب وكثير من الناس وكثير حق عليه العذاب وما يهن الله فما له من مكرم إن الله يفعل ما يشاء. The ayah says, don't you see that everything makes sujood to Allah? Everything is in state of that humbleness to Allah. Everything in the heavens, in the earth, and the sun and the moon and the trees and the animals and everything, and many of the human beings. So the only ones that are the exception of this is those who disbelieve in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and turn away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So al-ibadah hiya ismun jami'un likulli ma yarda al-ilahu as-sami'. Ismun jami', it's a noun of course. So it refers to, it's a very comprehensive word, jami', like the word jami' brings everything in it. لكل ما يحب ويرضى, for anything and everything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves and pleased with. He says مبني للمعروف فاعله الإله. So لكل ما يرضى الإله. الإله is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the one to be worshipped, السامع, the all-hearer subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. من الأقوال والأعمال الظاهرة والباطنة, and we talked about that definition before, which when we get to know this definition, everything in life comes under the meaning of al-ibad. So the ibadah is ismun jami', very comprehensive word. لكل ما يحبه الله ويرضاه, for everything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves and pleased with. من الأقوال والأعمال, from the speech and actions. الظاهرة والباطنة, physical actions, non-physical actions. So that means what's left? Nothing. Everything comes under the ibadah. فالظاهرة, as an example, the apparent, the physical actions, كالتلفظ بالشهادتين, to say أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمد رسول الله وإقام الصلاة وإيتاء الزكاة والصوم والحج والجهاد في سبيل الله والأمر بالمعروف والنهي عن المنكر وإغاثة الملهوف. All of these terms are familiar with. إغاثة الملهوف, to help someone, this is عبادة, physical عبادة. نصر المظلوم, to give, to aid the oppressed one. تعليم الناس الخير, to teach people the good. الدعوة إلى الله عز وجل, the da'wah وغير ذلك. Physical actions that we get to know that it's pleasing to Allah because it's in the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام. الباطنة, the inward actions, كالإيمان بالله وملائكته وكتبه ورسله واليوم الآخر والقدر خيره وشره, the pillars of الإيمان. وخشية الله وخوفه ورجائه, again, fear of Allah, hope for the rewards from Allah. These are actions, and when we keep on repeating this over and over again, because these are actions that many of us, we don't see that it's actions. It's not feelings. It's not the feel that a person gets that he fears Allah at a moment of his life, or the feel that he hopes for the reward from Allah. These are actions that the heart are upon it, and they are increased in certain moments and not witnessed in other moments, but the hearts are always having these things. And it becomes very clear and apparent if a believer is about to commit sin, then what happens? What comes this action in the heart that takes him away from this? The fear of Allah. He leaves it because of the fear of Allah. He's doing something called the fear of Allah, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala stated that in the Quran. When the two sons of Adam, one want to kill the other, and the one that was killed, he says, إِنِّي أَخَافُ اللَّهَ رَبَّ الْعَالَمِينَ. I fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for me to do something evil like this. So وَالتَّوَكُّلْ عَلَيْهِ وَالرَّغْبَ والرهبة, as mentioned before, والاستعانة به والحب والبغض, love and hate في الله, والموالاة والمعاداة فيه وغير ذلك. So physical actions, non-physical actions. And then we'll take a break inshallah ta'ala in 5 minutes. ثم أعلم, then have the knowledge, أنها لا تقبل الأعمال الظاهرة. Now this is the serious matter of أعمال القلوب, that the physical actions are not going to be accepted ما لم يساعدها عمل القلب, unless it's aided, and this is a very precise meaning to it. ما لم يساعدها عمل القلب, unless the action by the heart helps it. What does that mean? That means if a person wants to make salah, right? So the salah physically is known, standing, ruku' and sujood. Unless there's a deed done by the heart to help the person do the act of ibadah, the act of the physical ibadah is not there, does not exist. One of which is al-ikhlas. If someone just makes the salah for people to give him sadaqah, charity for example. If a disbeliever stand and make salah, he just imitating people in the actions, it's not salah. Because al-iman is not in his heart. He does not have the faith. And if someone is purely doing that to show off like the hypocrites, then so the deed done by the heart is the foundation to it. ما لم يساعدها عمل القلب. ومناط العبادة هي غاية الحب مع غاية الذل. مناط العبادة. المناط, what's the translation of the word? المناط is a very common word in usul al-fiqh, and in the essence of principles of extracting the rulings, to know the manat, to know exactly what is the thing that upon it is the ibadah. Without it, the ibadah does not exist. Like, for example, when they say manatul taklif al-aql. Taklif is to be responsible. What's the manat of the taklif? Al-aql, reason. If someone is insane, he's not responsible. It goes away. There's no responsibility. He's not to be held accountable for his actions. He's insane. He lost the thing which is, they call it manatut taklif. What the taklif is all about it. That means to have the sanity and so on. So here, manatul ibadah. What is the manat of the ibadah? What is the ibadah is upon? If a person doesn't have it, there is no ibadah. What is it? غاية الحب مع غاية الذل. The perfect love of Allah with the perfect submission to Allah. That's what the ibadah is upon. These are the two pillars, as they call it, the two pillars for the ibadah. The perfect love of Allah, the perfect submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَلَا تَنْفَعُ عِبَادَةٌ بِوَاحِدٍ مِّنْ هَذَيْنِ دُونَ الْآخَرِ. The ibadah does not benefit if it's one and not the other. And this is what keeps the person upon the truth, the haqq, that governs the life of the person, that he's not deviated to the deviant sects and so on. He says, وَلِذَا قَالَ مَنْ قَالَ مِنَ السَّلَفِ. Some of the early generations of Islam, they said, مَنْ عَبَدَ اللَّهَ بِالْحُبِّ وَحْدَهُ فَهُوَ زِنْدِيقٌ. Whoever worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala only with the love of Allah, he's zindiq. A zindiq is the heretic, the one that does just whatever he wants. And most of the people on the face of the earth, they would say that. They have the love of Allah. Okay, then that's it. They claim that they love Allah. And that's not ibadah. The ibadah is not established just on the love of Allah. Because otherwise, they would just do things and they would say, but we love Allah. So they would kill, but we love Allah. They disobey Allah, but we love Allah. They just think that they are in state of ibadah. فهو زنديق. ومن عبده بالرجاء, and therefore they won't follow the commands of Allah because they say it's only the love. Right, so that's it. وَمَنْ عَبَدَهُ بِالرَّجَاءِ. Whoever worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with hope only, فَهُوَ مُرْجِئ. The murji'ah, deviant sects. Only hopes. No punishment and nothing of that nature, just hoping. So if it comes, it comes. If it doesn't, still he has hope. He doesn't do anything. He's not obedient to Allah. He's disobedient to Allah, and he just have hope. وَمَنْ عَبَدَهُ بِالْخَوْفِ وَحْدَهُ فَهُوَ حَرُورِيٌّ. And whoever worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with only the khawf, with only the fear, is haruri, like the Khawarij. Everything is just dark. Everything is just punishment and fire and nothing else. Just fear. He is like the Khawarij. deviant. وَمَنْ عَبَدَهُ بِالْحُبِّ وَالْخَوْفِ وَالرَّجَاءِ فَهُوَ مُؤْمِنٌ مُوحِدٌ. And whoever worship Allah with these three together, the love, al-hubb, wal-khawf, and the fear, and al-raja. And this is where Salaf, they used to call this is the arkan al-a'mal al-qalbiyah. These are the pillars of the ibadah by the heart. Like the pillars of the salah. The salah is not valid when the pillars of the salah is not there. The pillars of every ibadah has to have these three things: the love of Allah, the fear of Allah, the hope for the rewards from Allah. If we take this as an example for the salah, for example, what gets the person to stand up if the iqamah is made? What makes you stand up and make the salah? Anything that this is a rule for all human beings. When people reflect, as Sheikh Rahimahullah, he says, anything, any harakah, anyone that makes any move in this life, it's because of the love of something. They love wealth, so they would do this. They love to be to rest. They love this and that. So what moves people is the love of something. So therefore, the ibadah has to be with the love of Allah. The fear of the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, exalting Allah, and as a result of that, a person fear, because the one that gave the command is the creator of the heavens and the earth. So who is this abd that is a creation of Allah to turn away from it or to say no? What is this? Where is the fear? Is not just fearing of the punishment, fear of the punishment and the fear of maqam. وَلِمَنْ خَافَ مَقَامَ رَبِّهِ جَنَّةً. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, those who fear the maqam of Allah, they're standing by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the day of judgment, and the exaltation of Allah. Whoever knows Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with his names and attributes, he fear Allah. Who are the most? Those who fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the most. The prophets of Allah. The Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, he said, أَنَا أَكْثَرُكُمْ لِلَّهِ خَشْيَةً. The one that feared Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the most is the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. And the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, he's been given the highest level in Jannah, and he got to know that in his lifetime. So, and he still had the most among all of the human beings, the fear of Allah. And al-raja, to have the hope from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because he's the owner of all things. So to hope for the rewards from Allah. So this is the mu'min al-muwahhid. And to remember this quote is good and is important. When you know that the love and the hope and the fear, then you see how those who deviated by worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with the love alone, love only, zindiq. The one that worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with the fear only, haruri, khawarij. Those who love Allah subhanahu wa worship Allah with the raja only, hope only, murji'ah. For a person to be safe from that is to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with the love and the hope and the fear. Then he explains what we just mentioned now. Just read it here. قلت. Then try to listen to what he says here, inshallah. وبيان كلامهم, to explain the statement. هذا أن دعوة الحب لله. دعوة. The claim that a person love Allah, which is many people they say that. بلا تذلل ولا خوف ولا رجاء ولا خشية ولا رهبة ولا خضوع دعوة كذب. Whoever claim that they love Allah without humbling themselves to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, without fear, hope, khashya, the fear with knowledge, to fully submit themselves to Allah, then this is a claim that is basically a lie. It's very easy for a person to lie. Anybody can claim anything. They claim day and night. But it's not about the claim. As the Arab poet, he said, كل يدعي وصلا بليلى وليلى لا تقر لهم بذاك. One of the poets in the times of Jahiliyyah, there was this woman called Layla, right? And they made so much poetry about Layla. So everyone claims that Layla, he's the one that has the connection with Layla. Everyone claims that she loves him, and everyone has Layla is his one, right? But she does not approve of that. So it becomes a statement that claiming does not make a person anything. He can claim for the rest of his life, but it doesn't mean anything. So this is how the claim is. So وَلِذَا تَرَى مَنْ يَدَّعِ ذَلِكَ كَثِيرًا مَا يَقَعُ فِي مَعَاصِ اللَّهِ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ. And you would find many of those who would claim that they love Allah, they would fall into many of the sins, and they don't care. ويحتج ذلك بإرادة الله الكونية وأنه مطيع لها وهذا شأن المشركين. Like the mushrikeen said, لو شاء الله ما أشركنا ولا آباؤنا. If Allah will, we would not have committed shirk, neither our forefathers. وقالوا لو شاء الرحمن ما عبدناهم. If Allah the most merciful will, we would have never worshipped them. ما لهم بذلك من علم وغير ذلك, and the like of this. Imamuhum, who's the imam of such people? Iblis. He is their imam in the ihtijaj, in the debate, in their evidences. When he said, رَبِّ بِمَا أَغْوَيْتَنِي, oh my Lord, because you deviated me. وإنما المحبة نفس وفاق العبد ربه فيحب ما يحبه ويرضاه ويبغض ما يكرهه ويأبه. The real love is when the person, what's real love? Is when a person is what he loves is what his Lord loves. So if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves something, the abd loves what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves. إن الله يحب المتقين, so he become from the muttaqin. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala he loves many things as it's mentioned in the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. So the abd loves what Allah loves, وَيَبْغَضُ مَا يَكْرَهُهُ وَيَأْبَى, and he hates what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hates. And all of that is to be known by the shara', by the wahy, by the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَإِنَّمَا تَحْصُلْ بِمُتَابَعَةِ الشَّرْعِ. All of what we heard from the very beginning till now, how to be upon all of this is by the wahy, revelation from Allah, not left for ourselves and our desires, or only that you love Allah, or that you fear Allah, or that you hope for the rewards from Allah. That's not sufficient for a person, even if he is the most sincere person, unless he follows the wahy from Allah, the revelation from Allah, which is the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. So this is where, inshallah ta'ala, we'll continue after the break, inshallah ta'ala, for 5 minutes, inshallah. So you can stand, stretch, if you want to, anything, inshallah. Just 5 minutes, inshallah. Barakallahu feekum.